It's Lisa from Been There Got Out. And tonight we are going live with Erin Levine. She's the CEO and founder of Hello Divorce. And I think we found out about her from Rayford Palmer, who's another, oh, there she is. Okay, good. Another lawyer who said, ooh, you should talk to them. I just invited you. Let me hope this works. Okay, let's see. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for coming on. It's funny because
Yes,
I always meet everyone beforehand, but you and I haven't actually seen each other till this very moment, right?
right. I feel like I know you, but all good things, but it's great to finally get to chat. And I'm so glad you had an opportunity to speak with another team member, Alicia, earlier.
Yeah, yeah, great. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and Hello Divorce and why you decided to do this project?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Erin, and I actually became interested in the justice system, like helping people through uh, complicated legal processes because I was actually a participant. I was a litigant back when I was a teen. I
A
unfortunately,
teen?
a teen, yes, I had been abused and by my gymnastics coach. And so I then turned him in and went through this wild court process, both on the criminal side, the civil side. And I just found it to be what I think probably a lot of your listeners experience, whether it be in DV court or divorce, really disempowering, re-triggering, traumatizing, scary, lonely, all those things. So that's initially why I went into family law. I became a lawyer and I practiced it for 16 years. I did litigation, I did big cases, I had a decent sized firm, but ultimately my mission became to try to the extent possible, help people opt out of the system altogether, and to provide tools and experts and great people to help people navigate through the divorce system on their own or with some help along the way. And it's not an option for everyone, but to the extent possible that you can do that, it's fantastic. And if not, we still try to provide as much support and resources as we possibly can, because you are not a failure if your case goes to litigation. To a certain extent, it takes both people to be committed to stay out of court. And if you're in a situation where either your spouse is dragging you through the ringer or you have an emergency or some really important issue that you need assistance with now, then you have to avail yourself to your options. And so I still always stand by, anyone who has to go through the process, try to make it easier on them if possible, but also try to provide tools to do as much on your own or without the expense of a lawyer as possible.
Yeah, well, I love that because, one of the things we work with our clients is what we call taking strategic oversight of their cases. And, because the community here that's going to be watching and watching now and will watch the recording later are usually involved in some kind of domestic violence, high conflict situations. And so they come out of these relationships, what I call like a puddle, like an absolute
Mm-hmm.
mess. We always say, we have to kind of get you back together so that you can run your case as a business, because you're really just looked at as a business transaction. And we don't want you to repeat the cycle of saying, okay, I gave my authority to somebody else. Now I'm going to pay a lawyer $15,000 retainer and they can save my life. And I don't have to think about it. We're like, there's a lot of choices that you have to make. And so you got to get your head in the right place. But I
Yeah.
also love, certainly we love good attorneys and need attorneys for things, especially at the beginning of the process, like the divorce, because that's the foundation of the case. But I like how it sounds like you're doing something similar with like, let's see what you can do yourself and get you the tools that you need to get through this as quickly and as cheaply as possible, if it is.
Yeah, well, we got to minimize the impact, right? Because we know that there's already a wealth disparity between men and women. And when you divorce, that disparity, unfortunately, statistically gets even bigger. So to the extent that we can be really wise with how we spend our money and really careful with which battles we choose, that's going to help minimize the impact and begin to set us up for that next chapter. So I love your approach. I think it's really, really important. And I think that we all need to think about it. I wish there was a lawyer out there that we could hand over the money, even if we don't like spending that kind of money, and trust that they are going to take good care of us. But that's actually not what lawyers are trained to do, nor do we as lawyers really understand what your ultimate goals are and what your priorities are, what your wants are versus your needs. So I love that idea of really getting through as much as possible so that you can get clear and begin to take some ownership over what this is going to look like.
Right? Because the clients are the people who have to live with it for the rest of their children's childhood and then the rest of their lives, unless they want to keep going back to court. And who wants to do that?
That's right. And lawyers, and there are some wonderful ones out there. I can name a million if anybody needs a referral. And I'd like to think that I was really well-intentioned too when I was out there litigating. But lawyers are taught to win. We prove our value by getting you the best result possible. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. And other times it might make sense to, like put something aside in favor of something that's more important to you, that is most important. And the only way that lawyer is going to get the message is if you are clear on what you need and then you share it with them.
Right. And I think sometimes, especially in our community, people are not clear because they have that foggy head. It's just like, get me out of here. I'll do whatever it takes. But you need to be clear to figure out what it is exactly that you're asking for, what you'd love to have, but then what you're willing to live with, because unfortunately, most people are not happy with the results because it's not really winning. Like nobody really wins. You just kind of try to get out as unscathed as possible, right?
And exactly. And it's just like, it's confusing. Like, not only do you have to figure out, like, unwind your finances, figure out how you are going to make ends meet, figure out how you're going to be a safe space for your kids and be kind to yourself. But now you got to figure out this complicated system that is really complicated. I haven't been to one state yet. We're not live in all, but I haven't launched in one state where I wasn't like, are you kidding me? This is so major. It doesn't have to be this crazy. So we get it. And then just to add to that person or that can help you get clear, or those resources, it doesn't need to be a lawyer. And that's why I love the fact that you offer this program and all the, incredible resources that you have. I think it's super important.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. So Erin, why don't you start, because you've been doing this for a while, some of the myths that people come in with as they're about to get a divorce. And I can think of a couple, but I'll see what you come up with.
Sure.
And I'll fill in the ones that we hear all the time. And then I had myself.
I was thinking your listeners probably have done so much research. They probably know a lot of these. So I was trying to think of, in this era of misinformation, what might be, some important ones for people to know. So a couple right off the top of my head, if you're in a state that has a waiting period, meaning a state where before you can get divorced, you have to wait a certain amount of time. I find that a lot of people think that once that time has lapsed, they're automatically divorced. And that's absolutely not the case. You generally still, if you have not completed and finalized your last documents, either your decree or your judgment, you are not going to be divorced. Another important one is that common law marriage doesn't exist in every state. And so if you are in relationship or you have children with someone that you're not married to, even if you're with them 7 or 10 years, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are married or that you have a legal cause of action. So that's important to know. And that would be a really good time, if you're in that situation, to consult with a lawyer. It doesn't mean you can't seek co-parenting agreement or child custody orders or child support. It just means there might not be property to divide. And the other one I think that comes up a lot for me are, it used to be that everyone stayed in marriage to protect their children, right? Like, it's better for our kids, regardless of what's going on with me and their other parent, like, it's better to stay in marriage. And so I think that's always been that myth out there, that staying in marriage is better for your kids, regardless of how bad the marriage is, than getting a divorce. And what we now know, in looking at research and talking to hundreds of kids who have been through divorce, is that that's not necessarily true. That kids are incredibly resilient, and that modeling, even if it's just in one home, like a happy, healthy relationship with yourself, an authentic relationship with others, being a safe space for your child or children, is so much more important and so much less damaging than being in a home where they're feeling a constant sense of tension or conflict or fear or whatever it might be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I was thinking of completely different myths. The ones that we get often are,
Yeah.
I want to go to court because then I'm going to have justice, and I want the judge to hear my story. Do you get a lot of that?
Yeah, we used to get a lot more of that in the law firm too. I think there is this myth, I think because we see it on TV and we see it in movies, we're just like constantly shown these images of like, court is where you get vindicated.
Exactly.
And it rarely happens that way. And when it does, it is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars later. And so there's a difference between wanting your best result, wanting to figure out where you have leverage and using that leverage to your advantage to get a decent result, and versus wanting to get revenge. Because the courts aren't generally punitive. There are ways that you can try to punish your ex, but it is very hard, and it rarely gets us where we want to go. So yes, I wholeheartedly believe in that one. That is just, the court is just not the place. Like, and there's nothing, when you think about how you feel in your body when you hate somebody else versus when you embrace and love yourself, it's such a lighter, more pleasant feeling to sort of focus on that to the extent possible versus all the hate and like feel your body sort of like crunch up, and like you're not going to change that person, and it's no longer your job to fix them. That's gone. You don't have to worry about that anymore. All you have to worry about is yourself. And in some cases, if you have kids, your kids. And I just hope that that feels a little lighter.
Yeah, I mean, and also in the past, I too thought court would punish and enforce its own orders, and it can be so frustrating. So actually, like, going back for validation or to try to punish, it makes it so much harder for you, because like you said, it's thousands of that. We have some clients who've spent millions of dollars on divorce, but it's endlessly frustrating because you think that the court is going to do justice or punish, and it just doesn't happen. So it makes it so much worse.
Yeah. I mean, the system is flawed. It was built in a time when divorce was in some cases criminal, in most cases considered immoral. And it hasn't changed much since then. It's not like it was built around making sure that you are safe and have your needs met. Now, there are some good laws that we can look to that are helpful, but in all, like, it wasn't built as a mechanism to punish or seek revenge. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's talk about, because you try to do it as cheaply, and it says for like a third of the time, which sounds awesome. But what are some resources that you do with your clients before litigation?
Yeah. So the statistics show that most people who file, and I know not everyone here is the filing spouse, but to the extent that most people file, they oftentimes consider divorce for 2 to 5 years before they actually file. And it's during that time period that you are saying, should I stay and just deal with it? Should I try to save? Can I get my partner on board to work on these things? Is my partner capable of working on these things? Do I want to? Are we compatible? Are we not? And it's during that time point that a lot of times we're like turning to the internet and we're like researching, because you may have heard me say this before, but it seems to resonate. We do everything in community, right? Like when we get married, we have weddings and funerals for death and baby showers for babies. But when it comes to divorce, it's like largely a pretty isolating experience.
That's
so
interesting. Yeah.
it shouldn't be, and you're working on making it less so. But that's a lot of times how it feels. And so we turned to the internet, and there was just, when I was lawyering, there was just so much out there that wasn't good. Or if it was good, it talked about one very like rare nuance as opposed to like what 90 or 95% of the law actually is. And so the first thing we do is try to provide like a ton of resources and content and videos and things to sort of demystify what the divorce legal process looks like altogether. And then we provide software that automates a lot of the legal stuff. So in almost every state, you have to disclose your finances, or at least what you know of them. You have to get the
that's the worst.
started.
The financial affidavit.
It causes so much stress. It causes so much stress because it's either like, I don't have all the information, or I do, but this is from my grandmother. I don't want to give it to them. And if I do put it out there, will I have to? I mean, that is by far the step that stresses our customers out the most. And so we try to infuse a lot of love and support there. But so there's the finances, there's the getting divorce started, and there's like working towards that final agreement. Most of that is automated, but to the extent that you need additional help along the way, we have mediators, we have lawyers, and we have divorce financial experts that are amazing. We call them CDFAs, that come to the platform itself to help you with different pieces. So some people do it on their own. They do the first few steps on their own, and then they take those documents to a lawyer and move from there, having saved some money. But most people, even in some high conflict situations, are able to use our mediators, even if that mediator is sort of shuffling between spouses and you're never actually on a Zoom call with your spouse as well.
Wow. I mean, and do you do anything in person, or is it only through Zoom?
No, we don't do anything in person. I mean, I do have a law firm still in the Bay Area, and for very contentious cases, we have some lawyers that definitely assist with those. But Hello Divorce itself and the services that we provide through Hello Divorce are all online, and is one reason, in addition to using tech to make things as efficient as possible, why we are able to like have these plans that are more reasonably priced and financed.
That is great. I mean, we do everything on Zoom also. So now what about the different states? So you're in California, but how many states have you launched in?
Yeah, so purposefully haven't moved as quickly as possible to national, because I think of like divorce tech as more than just throwing up PDFs that are automated, right? You have to understand what the questions are so that you can answer them in a way that's going to benefit you and not blow up your case. And so we've taken a very slow, sort of deliberate approach, bringing in lawyers from each of the states that we're in, and financial planners and mediators, to make sure that we're doing this measured and thoughtfully and all that kind of stuff. So we are currently live in California, New York, Texas, Colorado, and Utah. The next state we're heading to is Florida. We expect to launch a couple national products, like ways to help, fairly soon. But in terms of like the start to finish, can I do my whole divorce with you? Those are the states that we focus on in a moment.
Okay, so just to get an idea of how the process works, let's say I'm not divorced yet and I'm thinking about it, like how would I start?
So you would start in one of a couple ways, depending on how you feel and what you're ready for. So most people start either by signing up for our newsletter, so they start to get some information about what divorce is going to look like, and or scheduling a free 15-minute call. For a lot of the people that speak with our team members, it's the first time they've said divorce out loud. And they have no idea whether their situation is going to work for hello divorce or not. And they're nervous about it and all that stuff. And that's okay. Like, you come as you are, like, share what's going on, share where you're at, and then we can help you to see whether or not it might be a good fit. We have some people that start with like our DIY and then they upgrade if they need more help or downgrade. The goal here is to have as flexible plans as possible so that, you know, because you just kind of never know with divorce. You can hope for the best, but sometimes things get messier, sometimes they don't. And so we try to just be really flexible. So usually the phone call, the signing up for the newsletter, following on social, and then, yeah, digging into a lot of the resources and content that we have.
Okay, so I love how what you were just saying is going to neatly transition to my next question,
Okay.
which is about red flags regarding how to tell if it's going to be tricky. And the reason I love this question is because I was in a marriage for 18 years and we didn't really fight. And I thought, well, you know, I mean, the last couple of years were awful, but I thought this is going to be smooth. You know, we're amicable, I thought. And within 20 minutes of talking to a really wonderful attorney, he said, you're going to have a bad one. And I said, how do you know that? And he was right. Not only did it take a full year, because Connecticut does have it's not a limit like a waiting period. It's like you have a year from filing to have to go to trial. So it puts an end date on it, which was good because we settled 2 weeks before trial. But my lawyer said, you're going to go right up to the end. And then he had no idea that it was going to be 7 years later and I'm still in the system and still going with post-judgment. But how did he know? I was going to say, well, I want to ask you, and then I'll tell you, because we actually have a book coming out in 2023, probably in January. And I interviewed my lawyer, you know, after my case was over, I was like, Eric, I want to know how you knew. And so he gave me a few red flags, but I thought it'd be interesting to see what you think, if there's ways that you could tell that something might not work or that it's going to be trickier than just going through the easy, amicable program.
Yeah. Well, they say you never really know someone until you divorce them. And it sounds like that was your experience.
Yeah.
And I do want to just preface this by saying that there are a lot of high conflict people that we have been able to, not just me, but really skilled mediators have been able to help and get through and get to resolution. So that, you know,
sorry to interrupt you, but you know, Chris has a friend who's a divorce attorney in Virginia, and she said if you have two good lawyers that can work together, it doesn't matter if the parties are high conflict, because they can work it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about good lawyers manage expectations. You never want a lawyer to say, you got this. This is all in your favor. We're going to walk in there and we're going to win, because it's never that simple or that predictable. Anytime you're putting something in front of a judge, you just don't know what judge or, you know, what's going to happen on that day. But here's like, these are the red flags that when I see them, I say to myself, I'm not, this, you know, this is going to be tricky. So one is when a spouse wasn't open with finances during the marriage and certainly is not being open with them now. Now, that being, like, a lot of spouses will not want to share stuff because they think it's going to ramp up conflict. And so if you approach your spouse and you say, hey, this might be really clear to you, but for me, like, I'm still catching up here. So it would be really helpful if you provide X, Y, and Z, and they don't provide X, Y, and Z.
Like, that's everyone watching you forever. That's us.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if they're not providing you access to that stuff, that's a big red flag. It also tells you how, like, scared and small they are. 'Cause, like, you know, yeah, not that I feel badly for them, but that's kind of pathetic that, like, you know, that they can't share that. So that's definitely it. I think when you have a spouse, like we spoke about this a little bit earlier, that is all about revenge, that they are not focused on themselves even at all and what but really on getting you back, making you mad, gaslighting you, threatening you. I mean, that is like, you know, most definitely a red flag. Somebody with like serious mental health issues. Now, again, we've settled many cases with narcissists. It's actually possible, but not all. And there are certainly ones that are just like closed. There's nothing you can do. Another big flag is if your spouse lawyers up with like the most aggressive lawyer in town. You go to their website and it's like, we will fight for you. We will stop at nothing. Is a really good indication of the type of lawyer that you're going to be dealing with. Those kind of lawyers aren't going to let their clients run the case. They're going to run the show, and it's generally time for you to find somebody who is super skilled. Best case scenario is your spouse doesn't hire a lawyer, maybe consults with one. There's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't hire, or they hire somebody who is really interested in alternative dispute resolution, is very good at mediation, is known for resolving conflict, might be an excellent lawyer, but you know, understands how to bring a case to resolution.
You're making me think of a myth that I forgot to bring up before, is like, I should hire a pit bull attorney. And you're saying basically this is why you shouldn't. It's going to cost you tons of money. It's probably going to drag the case out.
Yeah, ideally, you know, I definitely have a problem with 95% of pit bull attorneys. In the divorce sense, it might be great in other areas of law, because they generally miss the point and they get so wrapped up in ego and proving their worth and value that they miss opportunities to get you closer to resolution and find your leverage. Because even a jerk, even a terrible human who might be your ex, is not going to continue to trial if they're going to lose everything or going to lose a ton because you have leverage. So finding that leverage is really important. So like along with that, it's really about like finding the right fit for you. If you and your spouse, at least at the start, have ground rules and you're committed to trying to work this out together, then you don't need to hire somebody who is wildly experienced in court. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm passionate about this topic.
No, me too. No, this is great. I love passionate, enthusiastic people, especially here. So I was going to say, one of the red flags that my lawyer told me way back in like 2015 was, or 2016 when we were done, he said that when there's addiction involved, he said when you're dealing with an addict who is not in active recovery, they can't make clear decisions in their own best interest. And so it muddies everything where they're not thinking about long-term consequences. So that makes things really hard. And then you mentioned a couple of the other ones. And then just one that he also broke up was when there is domestic violence involved for a different reason than we'd expect. He said, because sometimes he'll get the client that's the victim, they are susceptible to being pulled back into the relationship so often. So it makes it very hard to proceed with getting to the end of it because they're so unsure, like, should I go back to this person? Should we get divorced? Do you notice that too?
Yes, definitely. You know, sometimes you have to step back and wonder, like, are you protected enough so that you can pause? Like, if maybe it's because you need some time thinking about whether you want to be in relationship, your spouse needs some time getting sober and they're willing to take that next step. Like, sometimes there's reasons to move it forward, especially if that's what you need, if you need closure, or if, but other times it can make perfect sense to pause. And we've had lots of people who have done that and circled back and come back later. And that is entirely possible too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we talked about lowering the level of conflict with having really skilled attorneys, but are there any other ways you can think of based on your experience to lower the level of conflict? I mean, we know it's usually one person that's creating the conflict, but how do you deal with a really difficult person, someone who's focused on destroying you?
Yeah. I have to go way back into my days of, gosh, there were many, many years where this was the only type of personality that I dealt with, but it's been a while. So I think that they're like, you know your spouse better than anyone in the world, and likely, and you know what their triggers are, and you know what gets them to move forward on things. And I think, a lot of times, for example, we might choose an expert to help us, like a custody evaluator or a private judge or a lawyer that we know, or a mediator that we know is going to get under our spouse's skin. Maybe we don't even do it because they're the best, or maybe we do, but get under their skin, and like, that's not helpful. So think about what might be. So one of my clients, for example, years ago, she said, having an authority figure, especially a man, unfortunately, in that situation, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are women that are totally capable, but a man has, like, I think that will be really helpful. Like, if it comes from the man saying X, Y, and Z has to happen versus me or my female attorney, we might make some progress. So in that scenario, and like, these were pretty privileged people, they were able to afford it, but they got a private judge, who was a wonderful, fair, reasonable, but man, to help settle the case. And the idea was, with this private judge, is that if they couldn't settle, that judge had the authority to make decisions that would be binding on both parties. That
We
was
call that judicial mediation. Is that
so,
what, do you guys call it that?
so sometimes, so if they have the ability to, mediation is usually where they just help you come to an agreement, but don't necessarily get to make binding orders. But if it's a scenario where you can agree that they will, then yes, sometimes called judicial mediation, sometimes called private judging, sometimes called arbitration, sometimes there's lots of special master, there's lots of different names for it. So when your lawyer or somebody else is tossing around different names, just ask for, what exactly does that mean? How can that help me? Another really good idea is, like, we had a situation where the spouse had this lawyer that would do whatever he wanted, right? And I've been on both sides. I've had men and women who were really awful to work with. In this scenario, he had this lawyer that was terrible to work with, had this huge ego. And so we felt that even if we were able to show our leverage, this guy's ego was going to get in the way of settlement, because he's just going to say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. So in that scenario, we brought in a mediator. So sometimes you go to mediation without lawyers, and that's okay. In this situation, we had lawyers. But then the mediator could say to the lawyer, without us being present, hey, you're wrong, and here's what will likely happen if you go to court. So they were able to, like, manage his expectations there and speak directly to the client too, in a way that I never would have been able to do it. So think strategically, think common sense. Think about, if I was advising a friend in a similar situation, what are the things I might do? Because if you think purely legal, or you ask for purely legal advice, like, that's not enough. All lawyers, most lawyers have subject matter expertise. Most lawyers understand the law. But how many of them actually can sort of strategize? And if you have a strategist, that's amazing. And if not, then maybe a divorce coach, a support group, something to a great book to help you along the way.
Yeah, we find that having, like, when we work with our clients on getting ready for a lot of this, before they go to court, or before they go to mediation, or before they meet with an evaluator, we focus a lot on social emotional skills, knowing that these professionals deal with really angry people all the time. So to really be conscious of that and to not be that person.
I had a client once, we settled the case somehow, I'm not even sure how. And I know at first it was really hard for the client because I was so kind to her ex, who I knew was awful, and it broke my heart. But I knew that's what the spouse needed to hear, that if I validated her, that she was going to be like more willing to engage in negotiation. So, like, remember that too. We're talking about a means to an end. And
Exactly.
sometimes this will feel really triggering, especially when your spouse always came out there and spoke really well and charmed everyone. Everyone loved them. And now your own lawyer, your own mediator, your own judge is actually, you know, like sort of seeming to fall for their spell. That's not necessarily the case.
I'm glad you noted that, because that's a big complaint we hear is like, and my own lawyer was believing that.
Yeah. And maybe they are, but like for the most part, like a really skilled lawyer, like will, like if you have a lawyer that has dealt with a lot of high conflict personalities, like I always told my client, I'm not sure how we're going to get there. We're just going to get there. So it might mean that I say or do something that doesn't feel good to you. And if that's the case, tell me. But like, we just got to minimize the damage, get you the best thing we can right now, and then move on.
Yeah. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of that, like, what are some other hard truths? I'll say we call it the harsh New York reality check. But what are some things that you have to repeatedly explain to clients? Like, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah, the court wants your child to have a relationship with the other parent, even if the other parent's a jerk, even if it means that visitation might be supervised or not. I mean, if there is a real physical threat, there are means, as you know, domestic violence restraining orders and things that you can do, or hopefully do. But like, if they don't pay child support, they still likely will be able to get time with their kid. If they are a jerk or using your child to send messages or to insult you, they'll probably still get time with your child. And I think that's an important one to know, because it's about, you know, taking care of you. And the way the court generally views it is it's better to have two parents, even if one is bad, than one parent and the other one totally absent from the child's life. Yeah,
I know. A lot of our clients have fantasies of stripping the other parent of the parental rights.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't blame them. In some scenarios, we've been able to, or at least for a period of time, if there's like active substance abuse or something like that. But it was shocking to me when I was a young lawyer 16 years ago to see that like this guy slapped me in front of a soccer game and yet is still going to be able to have visitation with his children. Like how does that even make sense? And that's pretty awful. Can I address a question I just
saw? Yeah. And there was another one I was jotting down. I missed it the first time. Go ahead.
Okay. So, generally speaking, most lawyers that litigate don't know how expensive the divorce is going to get. And so they oftentimes take a retainer, which I know your people are familiar with. You pay a lump sum that goes into an account. And as you work on your divorce, that money, you know, gets depleted. So if you work for an hour, then the lawyer gets to take an hour of time and pay him or herself. And then if your retainer runs out, you have to pay more money. So the retainers are almost always refundable. And the first place you can look at is your agreement. And if you can't find your attorney-client agreement because they never sent it to you or because you're like in it and you have so much going on, then you can ask the admin or the paralegal for it. But it's almost always refundable, and you can switch lawyers. I know it's hard, especially I'm just trying to think about you like 7 years in. At 5 years, you're not going to switch. But if you're like fairly new or you just feel like it's going down the wrong path, you can switch and you can get a refund on whatever's left in that retainer. So I hope that kind of answers that question, but happy to expand more.
Yeah, that's good. And then I think that person asked a similar question. I just scrolled up a little. How to tell if your lawyer is the best skilled to prepare you for, you know, dealing with a covert narcissist and probably a high conflict case?
I would, what I would do is, so first of all, you don't want to be sending questions or emails all the time, right? Like you have to be strategic about this. It's really expensive. So unless it's an emergency, you save your questions for when like you have a bunch together and you schedule a call, like a 30-minute call. That's all we're going to do. And I would, in that call, I would ask like, what's your experience with like really high conflict folks? Like, what is your strategy what do you think my best case scenario is here? Like, what is your biggest fears about my case? If they file a motion, like, what would be your response? Do you think there's a possibility of resolution? So asking questions that take really emotionally mature responses, like somebody who clearly isn't just doing the moves, because that's most lawyers. Most lawyers, not on Instagram, actually. I've seen so many amazing family law lawyers on this platform that are doing great things. But most lawyers in my everyday practice, they do the same thing across the board. They like file the court case, and then they immediately like have the other party served by a stranger without any, warning or anything, which sometimes is necessary, but not always. And then they immediately file a motion in court to get a bunch of money because, just in case, right? Like, it's just like, and they just sort of like take the steps instead of actually considering like, how might this be perceived by the other side? How might this be perceived by the court? Is this really going to get us where we need to go? So somebody who thinks differently. And we always say, like, your lawyer's not your therapist. Don't like, and that's true. Don't like spend thousands of dollars pouring your heart out. But you can have a lawyer who does emotional lawyering, who actually cares and is considerate of your feelings and can say to you, hey, like, clearly you're really upset here. I get it, but let's take a break. Like, having a lawyer who is empathetic and emotionally intelligent is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah. That was my divorce attorney. He was wonderful. I spent a lot of money with him because I didn't know what I knew then, but yeah, he was my best friend for that year. But
I love that. I think that's important. Yeah. And know the type of lawyer. I mean, we have one lawyer who is really just like, he is amazing, but he's just like, really like, here's the law, here's how it goes. No, you don't want to waste your time. And a lot of our clients really like that. They want, right? And then there's other, and then most of our other lawyers are very different, right? It's a much more like emotional connection. And that's totally great if that works for you.
Yeah. Do you see that question? Erin, I don't know if you want to address that, because I have another question for you.
Push to hold my case after serve and how long? Yeah, I mean, it's so hard for me to know without knowing like where you are and what important issues are up for now or not. I can tell you that, if there's no emergencies, we often do that. Like, we'll help a customer file. Because oftentimes the other spouse like doesn't realize or won't really take it seriously that you're going to divorce unless you actually take a legal step. And then we break to allow them an opportunity to try to work things out, either reconcile, or if they're working towards a divorce, work towards an agreement. Now this listener's in California, and California already has a waiting period anyways. And the way that waiting period starts is by serving or delivering the initial documents to your spouse. So you'd at least want to do that. And then you can go at whatever pace you want. But again, if there's like an emergency or like some big issue, then, you got to weigh the pros and cons there.
Yeah. There was another question that said, can I get a mediator if my husband doesn't have a lawyer?
Yeah. So we do that a lot, where the mediator will work with both parties. Sometimes sometimes our customers also are consulting with the lawyer here and there, like a half hour here, hour there, to prepare for mediation sessions. Sometimes their spouse isn't. Then once you get to an agreement, you have a couple options with us or with anyone. And that is, you can either review it with a lawyer to make sure everything says what it's supposed to say. Or in some scenarios, we're seeing, I love that so many of our customers are getting so creative, where they'll decide, let's meet with a financial planner. Like, I trust that the lawyer got everything in here. I know what the agreement is, but I want to talk to a financial planner just to make sure like everything's kosher. I'm going to be okay. Post-divorce, no surprises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somebody mentioned, and I think I could probably address this, like they're thinking of leaving and they're worried that their husband's going to get really hostile.
Yeah.
And she's afraid to start. And so I am a state certified domestic violence advocate, and you're right to be worried, because that is the most dangerous time So please just contact your local domestic violence center and do some what's called a safety plan, which is part of an exit plan to really plan for this, and try to hold your cards close to your chest right now because it is a dangerous time.
Yeah. And know that it won't last forever, but now is the part to be what feels selfish, but really just taking care of you. Like now's the time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, I was going to say, I think we already talked about when to tell when something would move to litigation, or way we gave red flags. I don't know if there's a difference between that or like when you're trying a while and you say, this is not.
I think it's good to address that separately because we get asked that quite a bit. So if you're stuck and no matter what you do, you're like your spouse started to participate. So they like filed something and now they're like in the action in the divorce itself, but then like won't do anything, won't respond, won't move forward at all. A good time to, at the very least, ask the court for what's sometimes called a status conference or a case management conference or a settlement conference to try to move the case along. The other is if you don't have access to like, money or kids, right? Like if you've been totally cut off, you can't possibly negotiate. If you don't have access to any money, it just is impossible. You're too worried about how you're going to make ends meet. So in that scenario, you might need temporary orders. Other than that, as long as you're making some progress, I say like have some grace because sometimes your spouse needs additional time to sort of wrap their head around what the settlement offer is. And also sometimes they, even though it was like obvious to you that the marriage was going nowhere for years, sometimes they like need some time to process it. Like, so it's a marathon, not a sprint. Unless there's an active like emergency, or it looks like it's headed that direction, or your spouse just will not help, will not do anything, then you probably don't need to rush off to litigation.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were saying that one of the most common things that we all deal with is someone's refusal to comply with discovery.
Yeah.
And it just goes on and on and on. And that's when I was in court 9 times, every single time. Judge, you have to, you have to give it to her. You have to give it to her. And just never, never, never. No consequences for not listening. And so frustrating.
There rarely is. I know. I mean, to the extent, and this clearly wasn't an option available to you, but like a lot of times in that scenario, we would just go subpoena the document straight to the source. I mean, it was a few $100s each time, but we could just go straight to the employer or straight to whoever we needed to get the documents. If that's a possibility, you might want to think about how to do that. Like they're all bad. So
I know. Our situation, there was properties with no leases and cash flowing all over the place. So tricky.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a situation where like, even if you were halfway reasonable, it would be great to sit down with a divorce financial analyst and like figure things out. But yeah, you were in a situation where you had to get the information so that you could before you could even start to think about what it would look like.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let me just check the time. Wow. We've been talking for like 50 minutes. It's just flown by. So I wanted to ask you, like starting to wind it up, because I really appreciate you that you've taken all this time to talk.
Sure.
But what kind of comfort or wisdom can you offer to people who are struggling to finish the process?
Yeah. So constantly reminding yourself you are not your divorce. Your divorce is just where you're at. I think like there are always mandatory steps in divorce. So in addition to getting to that agreement or getting that court order, there are always things that you have to do. So figuring out either through us or through a lawyer or online through the courts, like what documents still have to get done no matter what. Because what we want to keep doing is making progress. Feeling stuck doesn't feel good. And so we've had a lot of people who are still negotiating an agreement or still trying to figure out what an agreement would look like. But there's some other documents that have to get done anyhow. So might as well start working on those. I think that's always like helpful to feel like you're making progress and moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. So, Erin, tell people how to contact you, because someone just said, how would you help? And I'm thinking, how do people find Hello Divorce? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple people ask that during the interview.
Amazing questions, lots of like hearts and supporting of each other. I love it. What a great community. You can find us at hellodivorce.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Hello Divorce. Yeah, I think that's it. All right. Feel free to ask questions if you need a referral or you want to schedule a call, like all that will be available to you.
All right. Excellent. All right, Erin, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure meeting you and talking with you. I'm glad you were able to field the questions so quickly too.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Let's stay in touch.
Great. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye.